This Sunday, Dublin played Mayo in the All-Ireland final, looking for a 6 in a row. And Steven Poacher, for Mayo to take down Dublin and stop that 6 in a row, you've got a bit of a 6-point plan.
Yeah, well, listen, Shane. Look, this is the fourth. I think this is the fourth meeting of the teams in an All-Ireland final in the last 8 years. So they're very familiar with each other. From a statistical point of view, it'll be interesting to see the statistics on what players are still playing, in those finals, and what players have gone on. I know Dublin, there's a big talk about Dublin's evolution and how they've evolved, and, how they bring in fresh players every year. And, I suppose Robbie McDade's the prime example this year, and people are questioning whether he's fit to replace Jack McCaffrey, and he pops up against Cavan in an All-Ireland semi-final and scores 1-4 from play. So, it's that put to bed any questions on him. But look, Shane, it's like any game, and it's like any team. I suppose you've got to go into the final thinking that Mayo have a chance. Mayo will certainly believe they've got a chance. Mayo will look at what they did well in previous finals, and they'll obviously look at things that they didn't do well. But for me, Shane, to win the game, Mayo are going to have to do 6 things, and I suppose one of the first things we'll talk about is game management, and I think it's a hugely important part of the game. I joked with you earlier in the show when we talked about Jose Mourinho, when he was managing Spurs a couple of weeks ago against Man City, and the commentator remarked to him and said, Man City dominated that game. They had 15 chances, they had 80% possession, you had 20 and 2 shots. And he says, they can take home the ball and I'll take home the points, and that's the key thing. It's about getting over the line, it's about winning. And funny, I was looking at him last week when Spurs played Arsenal, and it was a very small thing, and a friend of mine texted me and he says, did you just notice that bit of game management? No, this is maybe a cynical side of things, but like, he had 3 substitutes warming up and down the sideline, and when Arsenal were going to take throw-ins, they were like walking in front of the throw taker, and they were, the ball was being sat down, and and another man was coming across to take the throw. But she'd be under no illusions, and I can tell you this now for a fact, when it comes to game management and little small things, Dublin are the masters at it. You think back to a couple of years ago where their physio and their doctor, they go in tandem and they run onto the pitch, and sometimes they're running onto the pitch in the middle of a restart, and they're blocking off a channel, or they're making a player change direction. That's not coincidental. That's not coincidental. That is rehearsed, and that is obviously very, very much an important part of it.
Would other teams do that? And you were involved with Carlow playing against Dublin. Did you see it? Did you see it coming? Did you try to do anything about it?
Well, they probably didn't have to. They probably looked at the Carlow game thinking, well, we would do enough to get over the line there, and maybe didn't have the same level of respect for Carlow maybe as they had for other teams. But on that game, one of the things we did very well was we looked, Shane, at the game management side of things, and it's something I would have taken from Bernard Jackman at the time. I was over with Bernard for a while, and he talked about, when smaller rugby teams are playing Leinster, or, you're playing a bigger team at international level like in New Zealand, he says, you want the ball in play stats to come down a certain percentage. You don't want the ball in play for 70% of the game. You want it in play for about 40-50% of the game. Now, that's not particularly nice for the viewer watching, but if you're there to win the game, and get over the line, it doesn't matter how you do it. And one of the things we decided that we would do against Dublin is look at a number of things. How can you kill time? How can you break the game down? Well, restarts, free kicks, injuries, sideline balls, make it as frustrating as possible for them, Shane, and one of the things that we prided ourselves on was obviously retaining possession of the ball. We had 58% of the possession of the ball in the first half of that game. Now, the half-time score was 8-5 at the time, and I'm not, Shane, coming on here to make an argument for this. I'm just saying, since that game, I have not seen a single team try that. I have not seen a single team go in against Dublin and try and manage the game. They let Dublin play the game on their terms. And I've always wondered why, and I listened to Mark O'Shea during the week talking about you have to go out and have a go at them. What is, define for me, what is having a go at them?
He says you can't sit back, you have to have a go at them. And then, do you know what you were saying there about managing the game and Bernard Jackman and bringing down the ball in play stats? That's reminding me of an article Miguel Delaney did in The Independent in England, talking about the game where Gerrard slipped and Liverpool lost the title against Chelsea, that they went out totally to disrupt Liverpool's flow. Whether it was throw-ins, whatever it was, they'd just try and stop the flow of the game. And I suppose you could even look at what Cork did against Kerry this year. They kind of broke up that game. There was cynical fouling around the middle. There was yellow cards flying. So I can see where you're going with that. It's nasty for the viewer when that happens, but so what? You're not there to entertain people.
Well, Shane, I go back to 2013 when Dublin beat Mayo in the All-Ireland final by a point. And I was at the game. I went to about 15 or 16 finals in a row with my dad. And I remember being at the game looking at it in astonishment at the level of cynicalism from Dublin in the last 10 minutes of that game. It was just on a different scale. You know, they were riding on people's backs. They were literally piggybacking people up the field. That's true though. But that is actually true when you actually look back at that final. And like, just to stop, win at all costs. Now, they've changed slightly because they've got that comfortable in games now that they'll manage it in a different way. What they'll do now is they'll manage it by seeing games out with long, stagnant periods of possession late in games, and they'll bide their time. And they've done that throughout the course of the last 3 or 4 years, and they've grown from a game management perspective. They're not as cynical now as they would have been back then. But listen, it's a huge part of the game, and it's something that they need to look at. But I suppose, Shane, a second point would be that they need to get off to a flyer. And I think that's the important thing. That would be point 2, getting off to a flyer. And if you look at Tyrone in the All-Ireland final of 2018, it's possible to get off on a flyer. Tyrone got off on a really serious flyer that day, because if you don't get off to a flyer, Shane, you're playing against one of the best counter-attacking teams in the country. You're playing against one of the best teams in the country at breaking at pace, breaking from deep. It took them 6 minutes against Meath. 6 minutes to have 15 men back inside their 45. That's all it took them, 6 minutes. So the game is 6 minutes old, and you could see Dublin's, template, their counter-attacking template. Now, they don't do that all the time. They obviously play with point men. They play with a high 4 up the field. Their two workers, Scully and Bulger, in the wings. They don't tend to play that high. They play it very deep, but they do leave 4 up. And Kilkenny's role has changed, which we'll talk about later in the show. But for me, getting off the flyer is so important. And you look at the destruction of Meath in the Leinster finals, and to an extent, Cavan, neither side got off to a good start. And you need to get off to a good start to them. And this Mayo team quite possibly could get off to a good start. You don't know.
So what would be point number 3 then?
Point number 3, Shane, would be to nail the matchups. And I remember speaking to Donny Buckley about this. And in 2017, under the guidance and coaching of Donny, Mayo probably had the 6 best man markers in the country at that stage, Shane. They had 6 defenders who were fit and capable of marking that man. The problem that Donny said they had was back then was that you would have Lee Keegan chasing Kilkenny for 55 minutes. Lee Keegan might be Mayo's best defender, but Kilkenny would run his socks off for 55 minutes. But then the substitution will be made. Kilkenny might slip off, and McManaman would come on, and he's full of the same vigour and intensity and running from fresh, and Keegan's been fatigued for 55 minutes, but Mayo didn't have the player to bring in to replace him. So it's an interesting one, the strength and depth that they have in their squad. But you have to nail the matchups. And I know one of the key things, obviously, one of the things that Dublin like to do is they like to play industry at 10 and 12. So you wouldn't match up on Scully and you wouldn't match up on Bulger. You don't really need to do that, but you need a match up in Kilkenny. You need a match up in Mannion. You need a match up in Con O'Callaghan. You need to get those matchups right. Dean Rock as well. Those are the key men. And Kilkenny's role has become very intriguing this year, Shane. Kilkenny has gone away from that sort of deep lying link man that makes 10, 15 passes around the middle third to that nearly out and out forward who's a ball winning forward and who's posing a real scoring threat. And that's a very, very intriguing role. And I think that what you'll see in the final on Sunday is you'll see Lee Keegan, or on Saturday, apologies. What you'll see is you'll see Lee Keegan probably picking up Kilkenny, but it'll be a different role this time. The last day that Lee Keegan picked up Kilkenny, Keegan was giving Kilkenny something to think about on the back foot. But what I noticed about Keegan's role against Quinlivan in the semi-final, Shane, it was ultra-disciplined. Lee Keegan turned a lot of ball over, broke, but I noticed him breaking. And when he got to the halfway line, he linked the play. Where he would normally continue his run, he stopped, filtered back, and picked up Quinlivan again. And I would say you'll probably have that in on Saturday night when they come up against it. But listen, Barrett will probably hang out of maybe Paddy Small, at corner forward if Small starts. If they decide to start with Small, you look at him. But the matchups will be intriguing. But that's one thing, Shane, that they'll have to do. They'll have to nail the matchups.
Can I ask you a bit more about Lee Keegan? So last year he marked Con O'Callaghan and Con walked past him for a couple of goals. I'm not blaming Lee Keegan for that. It's very difficult to stop him in a one-on-one situation. Yeah. The other thing about him not continuing on his runs against Tipperary, for example, is it because they now feel that Paddy Durkin is the man to do that, or McLaughlin, that they have other lads who they feel can do that, and maybe Keegan, because he's got so many miles on the clock, isn't the same, isn't quite as good at doing that anymore? Or is it just a tactical thing?
I think Durkin and McLaughlin at 5 and 7, Shane, will be Mayo's energy lines. And it'll be interesting now. I don't think Dublin will leave Paddy Durkin free. I think Dublin could actually match up on Durkin. I think Dublin might put a man marker on Durkin. That Scully's role might change from dropping deep and allowing the halfback to get possession, where he might be clawing out of him, or Owen Merkin might play him. You just don't know, because this Dublin team are so flexible, Shane. And the other thing about Keegan is, well, he's been around the block a long time now, Shane. So there's a lot of miles in the legs. And that energy level of going up and down the field now maybe is gone from him. So maybe they see him now as and I look at him last week, Shane, physique-wise, like he's a complete animal, So from a conditioning point of view, he's well fit to pick up any of those Dublin forwards. But Conor Callaghan's a strange one, because the lad is he just seems to be a freak of nature, from a physical point of view, and he's very difficult to handle, both from kickouts to both on the ground and in the air. And it's going to be a real test of Mayo's mettle, and also tactically it's going to be a proper test for James Horan to nail these matchups.
And do you see, who do you see picking up Con? Do you definitely think it'll be Kilkenny against Keegan?
Well, I'm only predicting that Keegan has picked up Kilkenny in the past when Kilkenny had that Roman role. But what happened, Shane, was that Keegan would have actually give Kilkenny something to think about going the other way. So on Saturday night, what you might find is that Keegan's playing in a more disciplined role, marking Kilkenny, because Kilkenny's role has changed. Kilkenny's playing closer to goal now. And he's a big threat, Shane. He's a huge threat. And what he does very, very well, Shane, and what they all do very, very well, and they caught Mayo last year on the stroke of half-time with it as well, was that backdoor cut. Where they're coming towards the ball. We've talked about it in the show before, the basketball style movement. Kilkenny is probably the best at doing that. He's probably the best at doing that, coming towards the ball as if he's going to win the ball, and then spins the back door, that really aggressive cut out the back. And Mayo will need to be switched on and keyed on for that, no question about it.
So if you look at the bench that Mayo used the last day, do you see how can they bridge the gap to what happened before? The likes of Jordan Flynn came in. I'm just going to check here, I had it up on screen. The likes of Jordan Flynn, and I think it was Darren Cohen came in, a couple of players like that. Do you think that they have enough?
Darren Cohen in the last couple of years, Shane, made a great impact, because they nearly needed him to carry the flag, because they didn't have a Conroy, and maybe Killian O'Connor wasn't firing in all cylinders in the last number of years. But to be honest with you, Cohen coming in is a great impact. I think that he kicked, maybe I'm wrong, did he kick 3 or 4 points when he came off the bench?
You had Michael Plunkett coming in, Pádraig O'Hora as well.
Yeah, so he kicked 3 or 4. The difference, Shane, is that Dublin probably have more personnel in more areas. If something's leaking somewhere, they can plug that hole. And I just feel that defensively on Saturday, what will happen is Mayo will make this a contest, and hopefully, please God, they do. But I feel as the game wears on and the game gets stretched, I think that the impact that Dublin have coming off the bench, of Costello and Mannion, if he doesn't start, if these guys don't start, they're the proper real match winners for me, Shane.
Yeah, not to mention Brian Howard. So that's number 3, nail the matchups. What's number 4 for you?
Number 4, Shane, is to try and expose any defensive frailties that Dublin may have. Now, you might say to me, what do they have? And they probably don't have any. But what they do, Shane, is they play very, very well. They have a well-organised zonal defensive system at times. And I say only at times, because they do play a very, very high-pressing man-to-man game. Now, the one thing, Shane, that I would say that Mayo have an opportunity on is that when Dublin press you on your kickouts, they leave space behind. Now, we probably haven't seen too many teams expose this yet. We're still waiting to see a team, I think Kerry maybe last year, but you're only talking about Kerry pressing maybe 7 Dublin kickouts, Shane, and maybe scoring 2 points. So like it's not as if it's a monumental sort of flaw in the system, But when Dublin press, what they'll do is they'll leave a lot of space in behind themselves. Now, they're very good at, when the ball's in mid-air, of covering that space, but it gives you that little moment, Shane, where they're not set up with a sweeper. This year, Johnny Cooper has worked as a sweeper, and people would say, coaches have said to me in the past, and Colin Nally, I'm sure, will be able to explain this in greater detail, and has done with you, how do Dublin create the sweeper? Dublin create their own sweeper, and at times, Shane, it's a different player every time. And the reason because of that is the flexibility in the way they're coached, and the way they train, and how they present themselves in the training field. Everyone's singing to the same hymn sheet. They're all tuned in with the game plan. But Cooper this year has been assigned to a sweeping role. But when he's been in the man marking role, Shane, and you seen early in the game against Cavan, I thought there was a foul on Thomas Gallagher early in the game that could have been a black card. It could have been a black card, and he was lucky. He conceded a free in the 14. I don't know if you remember the incident.
I do, yeah.
But he was sent off, yeah. He was also sent off in last year's All-Ireland final in a man marking role. So if you can sort of try and isolate those men, and get them in those one-on-one situations, but isolating them and getting them into those situations, Shane, on paper is a different thing than doing it on the field.
Yeah. So that's number 4 then. Number 5.
So number 5, Shane, is to bring a savage intensity and work rate. I think that's probably, we can talk, Shane, about money and population and, the Crow Park factor. But one thing about this Dublin team, Shane, they work savagely hard. And if you actually look at their games quite recently against Cavan and Meath, one of the things against Meath, Shane, was that they were 19 points up. I think there was 10 minutes left to knock. And the tackling and harassing, it was a thing of beauty. It was just the mentality that they brought, Shane, was just unbelievable. And that's something that they don't probably get respect for, Shane. This is probably the hardest working team in the country. And if we go back to 2018, when they played Tyrone in the All-Ireland final, and the reason to go back that year is because I've got the stats here in front of me. That year, Dublin accumulated the highest tackle count in Ireland, right, with 57 tackles in the game. Now, you might say to me, what's the definition of a tackle? The definition of that particular tackle might have been to move 10 metres to make a man turn, or, to dispossess a man. Tackles aren't dispossessions. Tackles are making contact and people change direction, So even if I go to you and press you and you have to turn and go back, that might be defined as a tackle. But they made 57 tackles in one game, which was better than anyone. Now, the only team that got close to them that year in 2018 was Tyrone. And they accumulated 56 in Ballybuffet when they beat Donegal in the last game of the Super 8s. So there's maybe a correlation between how hard you work and how successful you are. And I wouldn't even say there is a correlation. I go back to club level. And a good friend of mine, John Kennedy. John would have been managing a local club here in Down, Glen Seniors. And John was big into the GPSs, and he used to, I think the club bought 30 of them, whatever, and they used to have them on the lads at training and matches. And John used to say to me, wild man for brilliant coach, very, very attention to detail. He used to say, Stevie, he says, we would go to Kilcoo on a Friday night, and we would maybe come out of Kilcoo with a really positive result, and maybe we might have a draw or something like that, and you'd look at the GPS results, and the work rate would be through the roof. The following week, they would be playing at home to a team that's maybe bottom of the league, and they would lose. And he says, and the work rate stats would be 30% less than what they were the previous week. And that's at club level, Shane, so it's very, very clear. And I say to the young lads in school all the time, if I could buy a bottle of work rate and pour it down your throat, you wouldn't be able to keep it on the shelves. But you wouldn't be able to keep it on the shelves because, Shane, it's not so much a physical thing, boy. I'm telling you this now, it's not so much a physical thing. It's a mindset. And the Dublin mindset is just fierce. It's fierce. And I fired a tweet out the other night, and I got a bit of criticism from certain Dublin quarters about, the whole thing about the gym in Abbottstown and them taking the equipment out and stuff, and it's a story for another day. But my argument is not about the team. My argument is far from what they're doing on the field. They're a phenomenally coached team. From a work rate perspective, you can learn so much from them. I'm saying to our county minors, watch them. Watch the way their forwards work off the ball. Can you bring that level of intensity to your performances? And this is something, Shane, that I have spoken about to so many young lads. Young people can learn so much from watching Dublin, but for me, for Mayo to match this, Shane, on Saturday, it's going to take an effort of monumental proportions, a level of work that Mayo have never done before, in that it's the old cliche, empty the tank. What does empty the tank mean? But on Saturday night, they are literally going to have to leave nothing out there. And this high press that Mayo perform, if they're going to commit to this, Shane, it needs to be on levels, tooth and nails, like they've never done before. Because if there's one weak link in that high press, Dublin will exploit it and they'll score goals against you.
Yeah.
So it's vitally important that Mayo bring that press Saturday.
So when you're talking about that, I'm thinking of an anecdote from the year with Coola, and the reason this is relevant is obviously to go on and win a club All-Ireland is no small feat, and you have the likes of Conor Callahan was on that team, but there's different ways of measuring tackling, like you were saying there. So my memory, and I won't have the numbers exactly because it's we're looking at 2016 into early 2017 when this happened, but our tackling rate in I think it was the quarter-final of the Dublin Championship was measured at 58. So again, it's very different type of tackling and it's a different code. But then by the time you go through all the different games, there was a curve, and we had a graph which the stats man used to show us, and people were very honed in on this, and players would go to him straight away after the match. how many did we get today? How many did we get today? So that whole work rate thing was perhaps in a way being bottled. And by the time of the All-Ireland final, the tackle rate, he was asked on the final, you know, in the dressing room afterwards, what was the tackle rate? You know, lads had just won an All-Ireland, and you had lads going up saying, what was the tackle rate? And it was 123, the highest we'd ever gotten. And a big cheer went up in the dressing room. So that's the importance of it, and that's how a management team got them to focus on that sort of thing. So it's no small thing at all. I just thought of it as you were saying it.
That's a fantastic insight. You know, and I remember years ago the boys would tell you stories from school about Peter McGrath, you know, the great Pete McGrath, obviously, that would have taught in St. Comans and managed down. And Pete used to say to his 6 forwards, you know, if everyone gets me 2 points, that's 12. Your free taker chips in with 4, that's 16. And your midfielders get 1 each, that's 18, you know, and that'll win a game. But it's about tackling. If you say to your 6 forwards, give me 2 tackles each in the first half, that's 12. Give me another 2 in the second half, that's 24. That's one of your forward lines, you know what I mean? So it's a small little things. And I think as well, Shane, if you're setting goals, they need to be specific and they need to be measurable, and players need to be able to achieve them as well. So brilliant, that's a great example.
And the final of the 6 points?
Well, the final of 6 points is probably the most important one. And we've talked about how to control the game and manage the game. You have to maximise your scoring chances. Like against Dublin in 2017, in 2017, Mayo created 48 attacks and only scored 17 times. So that's 1 in 3, Shane, really. An average of 1 in 3. You need to be up around the 1 and 2 stats. So if they're going to create 48 attacks, they'll need 24 scores or 24 points to win this game on Sunday or Saturday. And it's I suppose if you go back to 2014, the last team to beat Dublin was Donegal, and they scored 315, I think, on the day. So that's 3 goals. So it may take Mayo a 315 or a 218 to get over the line. Now, Cillian O'Connell the last day scored 4-9. The chances of him scoring 4-9 this Saturday are slim and far between, because he'll be well marshalled, maybe by 1, but probably by 2 players. So every time he gets the ball. So if you were to take that out of Mayo's team, now the flip side of the argument is that Conroy set one up for him, somebody else set one up for him. You know that all the chances would have been there for someone else anyway. But Dublin will have that well earmarked, and they'll be looking at that, and they'll be really looking all week from a video perspective of how we can shut that down. But for Mayo to win on Saturday, Shane, you can be so defensive, you can be well organised, but when you get those scoring chances, you have to take them. And especially, Shane, and I've wrote here as well in my notes, the importance of a really strong-minded free taker is so important.
I watched the Mayo against Tipperary All-Ireland semi-final, you know, and the scoreline was very unflattering to Tipperary for a finish, 5-20 to 3-13. But I was watching that very much from a Tipperary point of view, being a Tipperary man. And the way I kind of, maybe this was just to sort of make myself feel better about it afterwards, but I looked at some of those goals and I thought the amount of times that Tipperary self-destructed. So like the back pass from Liam Casey to Evan Comerford, and Comerford maybe should have come for it. Then there was the 45 in that Diarmuid O'Connor was able to palm in 2 yards from the goal. I mean, the keeper or defender, like if I'm playing in the backs in a match ever and a free is coming in, I'm telling the cornerbacks and everyone else nobody gets into the square. So that's self-destruct as far as I'm concerned, that was allowed to happen for a few reasons. The goal that Cillian O'Connor scored with his left foot in the second half, the defender fell down as the ball was coming in. There was an awful lot that went wrong where Tips, imploded. And at the same time, Mayo conceded what I consider 11 goal scoring chances. Some people might say 10. We won't argue the toss. But you concede that many chances against a Division 3 team. What on earth are Dublin going to do to you? And these weren't like half chances. Stephen O'Brien missed a 1-on-1. Liam Boland missed a 1-on-1. There was a few others as well.
The only thing, Shane, that you could maybe hone in on that respect would be that you can only really beat what's put in front of you. You know, so did Mayo have to really even kind of second gear at times last Sunday? Probably not. But at the same time, I completely agree with what you're saying. If you're going to choke those chances up to Dublin, I've said it earlier in the show, you know, they will punish you. But it'll be interesting on Saturday, because you listened to McCaffrey last week and he talked about the pressure and you know, the real probably heaviness that an All-Ireland final brings you, and and how players cope and how players deal with it. You have a lot of sort of lads Dublin panel that are now chasing this 6 in a row, you know, which has never been done before. Well, previously 5 in a row as well, but they're chasing this 6 in a row, this historic moment, and that might have an impact on them. You wouldn't know. You just wouldn't know, you know, whereas Mayo are coming in with a free shot, lose. A lot of these players have been here before. They'll use their experience. Horn, I think, mentioned somewhere in the media that these young lads have no fear of Dublin. They have no fear of the consequences of going in against them. So it'll be interesting to see if Mayo can really bring that level of what I would probably say, Shane, 2017 intensity. Like 2016 was just different altogether. Like it was so strange a game. Mayo were in complete control and conceded 2 own goals, you know, and you're looking back going like, how is that possible, you know? So Mayo have been the one team, Shane, over the last 8 years of Dublin dominance that have got close to them, you know, and have got under their skins at times and made it difficult for them. So who knows on Saturday, but listen, my money's in Dublin.
Yeah, I mean, they've met 16 times in Championship in history. Half of them have been since 2012. That's quite incredible, isn't it? That this rivalry has been mainly distilled into this past decade. Would you go along with any of these ideas about split Dublin in 2, amalgamate counties, the stuff that Pat Gilroy was saying? And I'm probably paraphrasing very kind of strongly there, so that's not everything he said. A lot of people reacted strongly against him. There was parts where I was like, do you know what, at least there's fresh thinking here. But then there's other parts of me that, no, I don't agree with that.
The problem that Pat had on Sunday night, Shane, was that he, last Sunday night, was that he came across, he made some reasonable points, I agree with you, but a lot of his points were I felt were said with a bit of arrogance as well, you know, and that's sort of like, you know, it's up to everybody else to sort their ship out type thing. And he made a couple of good points, and one of the points, I think one of the most valid points he made was the financial side of things, that if the money is handed to other counties, who is actually dealing with this money? Who is actually making the decisions with this money? Because let's be honest here, and poor Eddie Brennan got shafted for talking about county boards, but a lot of county boards don't have full-time administrators, okay? So they're volunteers, right? So they're doing the job on a voluntary basis. So therefore, a lot maybe might not have a business acumen or a business mindset or a business head on them, right? And that's not being respectful of county board officials. But if you had someone in there who was shrewd, who had a business head on them, who knew how to sort of maybe manipulate situations, who knew how to, you know, deal with this, how to get money, how to handle money, how to make money, you know, how to distribute money. And I go back to a number of years ago where I had a coffee with Kieran McGeaney of Armagh, and one of the things I was looking for an insight into them was the fundraising element of Armagh and how they get the fundraising drive and approaching businesses and collaging together a group of money that'll not go towards the senior team, but actually go solely towards the development squad, Shane, and the academies. And that's something that I think a lot of counties have now sniffed onto and realised that what's the point of giving an outside senior manager at inter-county level, I don't want to throw figures out there and scare people, but say for talk's sake, you're paying an outside manager 30, 40 grand, which happens, let's be honest, right? We're living in a world where coaches get paid, whether the GA like it or not. They're burying their heads in the sand over it. But you take an outside coach getting 40k, take that 40k and pump it into your development squads. Imagine the development and imagine, you know, the progress that you would see if that money was used wisely at an underage level in your county, where people who were delivering the level of coaching to those young lads were people from the county, were proud people. You look at the David Powers of this world who have thralled the county with tips, you know, homegrown people. And Dublin have a lot of things right, and we'll have to give them respect too, Shane. It's not the people's fault that the money has gravitated towards the capital. But one of the things they've done well, Shane, is they've got their clubs all have GPOs. Okay, yes, that costs money. But the stories I'm hearing out of a lot of Dublin clubs are that they would rather spend their money on developing their underage structures, appointing a GPO, than paying an outside manager. You know, so it is an interesting one. And a lot of our counties, like Tyrone, have a lot of good structures in place. There's no question about it. Donegal are the same. I can't speak for Kerry. I can't speak for Mayo. I don't know what's going on up there. But a lot of counties in Ulster here do have good structures in place, are doing a lot of good work. But your hands are tied from a financial point of view and just a numbers game as well, Shane. You know, you're dealing with, for example, when I was at Carlow, I give a prime example in Carlow. Sean O'Brien, rugby, Tullow Tank. You know, you're dealing with rugby. You're dealing with soccer. Padraig Ammons over at Newport shooting the lights out. Soccer's a big sport. Half the county played hurling. You know, so it's the second smallest county in Ireland, and you're trying to get them to compete with the biggest county in Ireland. You know, and it just doesn't make sense. You know, so there's a lot of challenges for a lot of counties, Shane, and there's a lot of counties doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes. But it would be a lot easier if they were getting the financial help and, you know, playing a lot of their games at home as well, because Croke Park is a huge factor. Like, if you were to say to Mickey Hart, or not Mickey Hart, apologies, if you were to say to Fergal Logan in the morning, you're going to play all your championship games next year in Oma, imagine the boost that would give them. You know, like imagine them being told that you're going to play every game in Oma from the quarter-final of Ulster right through to the All-Ireland final. Sure, the advantage that would give Tyrone, you know, from knowing the ground, knowing the change rooms, it's just, it's actually ridiculous when you think about it. Like, you know, that like saying to Man United in the Champions League, you're going to play every Champions League game at Old Trafford, including the semi-final and the final. You know, you're going to say England in the World Cup, you're going to play every game at Wembley. It does, you know, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So there's a whole load of things, Shane, that we can talk about population growth and we can talk about amalgamating counties and splitting Dublin. But let's go to the basics and start with, like, right, take them out of Croke Park first and foremost. And that can start next year. That can start straight away next year.
And like if someone said to you, like, we will go down this amalgamation route and Down are going to be thrown together with, I don't know, Antrim and Armagh. Do you know, are you going to go with that? Like Monaghan and Cavan, you know, he talked about these lads know each other from DCU, which I know people probably hammered that point very hard. But what do you make of this idea of amalgamation? I think it stinks, and I don't like the idea of splitting up Dublin either, because I don't like the idea of basically erasing your identity. You're now North Dublin and South Dublin or whatever. But anyway, if you were told Down you're being thrown together with Antrim there tomorrow.
Well, could you tell me off the top of your head, how many All-Ireland finals has there been? 120 or something, has there? How many All-Ireland finals has there been?
It could be close to 140.
140, right? So Dublin are chasing their 30th title, okay? And Kerry have 37. So you have two teams that have dominated 60% of the All-Ireland over the last 130 years, whatever it happens to be. So there's got to be dominant teams, Shane. You know, you look at the English Premiership, Liverpool on 19 titles, Man United on 20. Then you have a gap to someone on 11 or 10, and then there's like a 7 or a 5, whatever, and a load of teams that are sprinkling. So it happens in all sports, World Cups, etc. You know, so it happens everywhere, Shane. And I just think splitting Dublin is a disaster, but I think amalgamating other counties is an even bigger disaster, you know, because you're taking away identities, you're scraping history out. You know, it's just, for me, it's a complete non-runner. I totally agree with you. Complete non-runner.
But what about then the idea of just scrapping the provincial championship? Because an awful lot of the problem is we don't see Dublin matched up. Like, I would have loved to see this year Dublin against Tyrone, Mayo, Kerry, you know, in a system that is a little bit more kind of based on the league. It would make, like, if they had to play, let's say, an 8-team league, right? And then the top 4 go into the semi-finals and then final or whatever. Wouldn't that have been unbelievable?
I think, I said it, Shane, anyway, I think we missed a trick this year. I think this year was a great year and a great chance to rip up the current structures, you know, and especially with the whole COVID thing. And I would love to have seen, for me, okay, you can shoot this down if you want, but for me, your main sort of competition should be your leagues. You know, that should be your bread and butter. And Division 1's very competitive. Division 2's ultra competitive. Division 3's super competitive, and Division 4. And if you look through the leagues this year, I think in every division there was 4 or 5 teams contesting promotion on the last day. You know, even in Division 1 there was teams looking to stay up, teams looking to make, you know, whatever, top 4 if they had been a top 4. So rebrand the leagues, make them your showcase competition. Every team plays 3 games at home, 3 games away. It's a fair system, right? And then in that league, so you have 7 games, 3 at home, 3 away, and 1 game at Croker. I don't know logistically how you would do that, whether you'd run 3 games off in the one weekend or whatever it happens to be, but everyone then gets a sort of a party. You know, it's a fair slate for everyone. And everyone gets that Croke Park experience as well. And then use your provincials as a pre-season competition before that to warm up, okay? But have the All-Ireland Championship, aka FA Cup, 32 teams into a draw, home and away, draw it out. Imagine the shocks. Imagine the opportunity. Imagine Dublin travelling to Carrick and Shannon in the first round. We know they're going to win, but imagine the day that would give the people of Leitrim, you know, and make these all-ticket affairs and jazz it up, even just for one season, Shane, and see how it goes. Something different. But I totally agree with you. You know, there's the opportunity of the Champions League style format. But again, I just think that delay is inevitable. You know, that the cream will always rise to the top, as you say, but you will get your shocks. You will get your knockouts. Like, I go back to 2018 in my own experience, like whenever that day in Tullamore when Carlow beat Kildare for the first time in 75 years, like that pitch was invaded for, people didn't leave that pitch for 2 hours after. It gave great joy, great sweat. But like 2 weeks later, Kildare were back in the Super 8s. You know, the backdoor thing doesn't work, Shane. It's unfair. It gives teams a second chance. And you'll always might catch a big gun once, but you're never going to catch them twice. And that's the unbalanced nature of the system. But I totally agree with you to an extent, but the provincial thing's a hard sell. And I'll tell you why. because Ulster's still wild attritional, wild competitive, you know, and everyone thinks they can win it, you know, and Connacht, obviously 3 or 4 teams are competitive. Tips success this year, but it doesn't happen that often, so there's probably a case that, yeah, you could probably throw them out, you know.
Yeah, okay, well look, that one will run. Thanks very much, Stephen.
Yeah, not a bother.